Let's get right into it. Number 10, the lamplighter. Before electricity, entire cities depended on people whose only job was walking around lighting oil or gas street lamps every evening and putting them out every morning. In London alone, thousands of lamplighters carried a small ladder and a lit pole, working their way down the same streets twice a day, every single day, rain or snow. It sounds simple, but it was skilled. Physical work done at odd hours. And losing your job usually meant a whole neighborhood went dark. The job didn't disappear overnight either. Electric streetlights rolled out gradually city by city through the early 20th century, so for decades, lamplighters and electric lights coexisted, with the lamplighters slowly being phased out street by street until the profession quietly vanished. Number 9. The knocker-upper. Alarm clocks were expensive and unreliable in the 19th and early 20th centuries, so working-class neighborhoods in Britain paid someone to wake them up personally. A knocker-upper would walk the streets before dawn with a long stick, sometimes tipped with wire or peas shot from a pea shooter, tapping on customers' bedroom windows until they saw movement. Some clients paid weekly, and knocker-uppers had to remember exact wake times for dozens of customers, adjusting for factory shifts that changed constantly. The job survived surprisingly long, with some knocker-uppers still working in industrial English towns into the 1970s. Run out of business not by the alarm clock itself, but by cheap, reliable ones finally becoming affordable for everyone. Number 8. The leech collector. In the 18th and 19th centuries, doctors used medicinal leeches constantly for bloodletting, and someone had to actually gather them from ponds and marshes. Leech collectors, often poor women, waded into cold water with their bare legs exposed, letting leeches attach themselves before pulling them off and dropping them into a jar. It was slow, miserable, and genuinely dangerous, since blood loss and infection were real risks, and demand was so high at one point that wild leech populations in parts of Europe were nearly wiped out. Some collectors switched to using old horses as bait instead of their own legs, which honestly should have been the plan from day one. The trade collapsed as medicine slowly moved away from bloodletting as a legitimate treatment. Number 7. The whipping boy. This one sounds like satire, but it was a real position in royal households, particularly in England. Because tutors and staff weren't allowed to physically punish a prince, a specific child, often raised alongside the prince from a young age, was designated to be punished in his place whenever the prince misbehaved. The idea was that the prince would feel guilty watching his companion get whipped for his own mistakes, and that guilt would function as discipline. In practice, the two boys often became genuinely close friends, and some whipping boys went on to receive titles, land, or positions later in life as a form of compensation. It's a strange system, but it existed because striking royalty, even as a child, was considered deeply inappropriate. Number 6. The Groom of the Stool. Despite the vaguely comedic name, this was one of the most trusted high-status positions in the Tudor English court. The Groom of the Stool's official duty was assisting the king with his toilet needs, which meant spending private, unsupervised time with the monarch every single day. That access turned out to be incredibly valuable politically, since the groom often became a close confidant who discussed state matters, controlled who could get an audience with the king, and sometimes managed the royal finances. Several men who held this position went on to gain serious wealth and influence, proving that in royal courts, proximity mattered far more than the job title suggested. Number 5. The Resurrectionist. Also known as a body snatcher, this job existed because medical schools in the 18th and early 19th centuries needed cadavers for anatomy training, but the legal supply, mostly executed criminals, never came close to meeting demand. Resurrectionists dug up freshly buried bodies at night and sold them to medical schools, sometimes for a shockingly good price. It became such a widespread problem that wealthy families paid for iron cages called mort safes to be placed over graves, and cemeteries hired night watchmen specifically to guard against grave robbers. The most infamous case, Burke and Hare in Edinburgh, actually escalated from grave robbing to murder to keep up with demand. The profession ended once anatomy laws changed to allow unclaimed bodies to be legally donated to medical science. Number 4. The rat catcher. Before modern pest control, cities employed professional rat catchers to manage the enormous rat populations that spread disease and destroyed food stores. Some rat catchers worked for city governments, while others operated independently, selling captured rats for sport, since rat baiting, where rats were released into a pit for dogs to kill for entertainment, was a genuinely popular form of gambling entertainment in Victorian England. One of the most famous rat catchers, Jack Black, held an official royal appointment and reportedly bred colored rats as pets on the side, essentially inventing the fancy pet rat hobby as a byproduct of his day job. The profession faded as poison, traps, and modern sanitation made freelance rat catching largely unnecessary. Number 3. The ice cutter. Before refrigeration existed, an entire seasonal industry revolved around cutting massive blocks of ice from frozen lakes and rivers in winter, then storing them in insulated ice houses to sell throughout the year. Ice cutters used long saws and hooked poles to carve and haul 1,000-pound blocks out of the ice, a job that was cold, exhausting, and genuinely dangerous, since falling through thin ice was a constant risk. At its peak, the American ice trade shipped natural ice as far as India, packed in sawdust to slow melting on months-long sea voyages. The entire industry collapsed within a few decades once mechanical refrigeration became affordable, turning a massive seasonal workforce into something nobody needed anymore almost overnight. Number 2. The plague doctor. The unsettling beaked mask associated with plague doctors wasn't decoration, it was considered actual medical equipment. Physicians filled the beak with dried flowers, herbs, and spices, believing bad-smelling air itself caused disease, so the mask was meant to filter it. Plague doctors were often not fully trained physicians at all, but rather contracted by towns specifically to treat the poor during plague outbreaks, since actual trained doctors frequently fled infected areas entirely. The job paid well precisely because almost nobody else was willing to do it, and the mortality rate among plague doctors themselves was extremely high. Their treatments, mostly bloodletting and questionable herbal remedies, did essentially nothing against the actual disease. But the job remained a real, government-contracted medical position for centuries. Number 1. The human computer. Long before electronic computers existed, the word computer described an actual job title for a person, often a woman, hired specifically to perform complex mathematical calculations by hand. Teams of human computers calculated artillery trajectories during wartime, plotted astronomical tables, and later calculated orbital mechanics for early spaceflight. At NASA, women like Katherine Johnson worked as human computers, manually verifying the calculations that sent astronauts safely into orbit and back, work so precise that John Glenn reportedly asked for her to personally check the electronic computer's math before he trusted his life to the mission. The job only disappeared once electronic computers became fast and reliable enough to fully replace what had, for decades, been considered a specifically human skill. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.